Welcome to Turkey. Turkey, also called Turkey, country that occupies a unique geographic position, lying partly in Asia and partly in Europe. Throughout its history, it has acted as both a barrier and a bridge between the two continents. Turkey is situated at the crossroads of the Balkans, Caucasus, Middle East, and Eastern Mediterranean. It is among the larger countries of the region in terms of territory and population, and its land area is greater than that of any European state. Nearly all of the country is in Asia, comprising the oblong peninsula of Asia Minor, also known as Anatolia, Anadolu, and in the east, part of a mountainous region sometimes known as the Armenian Highland. The remainder, Turkish Thrace, Trachea, lies in the extreme southeastern part of Europe, a tiny remnant of an empire that once extended over much of the Balkans. The country has a north-south extent that ranges from about 300 to 400 miles, 480 to 640 kilometers, and it stretches about 1,000 miles from west to east. Turkey is bounded on the north by the Black Sea, on the northeast by Georgia and Armenia, on the east by Azerbaijan and Iran, on the southeast by Iraq and Syria, on the southwest and west by the Mediterranean Sea and the Aegean Sea, and on the northwest by Greece and Bulgaria. The capital is Ankara, and its largest city and seaport is Istanbul. Of a total boundary length of some 4,000 miles, 6,440 kilometers, about 3/4 is maritime, including coastlines along the Black Sea, the Aegean, and the Mediterranean, as well as the narrows that link the Black and Aegean Seas. These narrows, which include the Bosporus, the Ottoman Empire at its greatest extent. A long succession of political entities existed in Asia Minor over the centuries. Turkmen tribes invaded Anatolia in the 11th century CE, founding the Seljuk Empire. During the 14th century, the Ottoman Empire began a long expansion, reaching its peak during the 17th century. The modern Turkish Republic, founded in 1923 after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, is a nationalist, secular, parliamentary democracy. After a period of one-party rule under its founder, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, and his successor, Turkish governments since the 1950s have been produced by multi-party elections based on universal adult suffrage. Turkey is a predominantly mountainous country, and true lowland is confined to the coastal fringes. About 1/4 of the surface has an elevation above 4,000 feet, 1,200 meters, and less than 2/5 lies below 1,500 feet, 460 meters. Mountain crests exceed 7,500 feet, 2,300 meters in many places, particularly in the east, where Turkey's highest mountain, Mount Ararat, Ahri, reaches 16,945 feet, 5,165 meters close to the borders with Armenia and Iran. In the southeast, the Uludağ Peak reaches 15,563 feet, 4,744 meters, though further west, Demirkazak Peak, 12,320 feet, 3,755 meters, and Mount Idos, 11,414 feet, 3,479 meters, are also significant peaks. Steep slopes are common throughout the country, and flat or gently sloping land makes up barely 1/6 of the total area. These relief features affect other aspects of the physical environment, producing climates often much harsher than might be expected for a country of Turkey's latitude, and reducing the availability and productivity of agricultural land. Structurally, the country lies within the geologically young folded mountain zone of Eurasia, which in Turkey trends predominantly east to west. The geology of Turkey is complex, with sedimentary rocks ranging from Paleozoic to Quaternary, numerous intrusions, and extensive areas of volcanic material. Four main regions can be identified: the Northern Folded Zone, the Southern Folded Zone, the Central Massif, and the Arabian Platform. The Northern Folded Zone comprises a series of mountain ridges, increasing in elevation toward the east, that occupy a belt about 90 to 125 miles, 145 to 200 kilometers wide, immediately south of the Black Sea. The system as a whole is referred to as the Pontic Mountains, Doga Karadeniz Dağları. In the west, the system has been fractured by the faulting that produced the Turkish Straits. In Thrace, the Ergane lowlands are among the largest in the country, and the main mountain range, the Yıldız, Istranca, reaches only 3,379 feet, 1,030 meters. Lowlands also occur to the south of the Sea of Marmara and along the lower Sakarya River, east of the Bosporus. High ridges trending east-west rise abruptly from the Black Sea coast, and the coastal plain is thus narrow, opening out only in the deltas of the Kızıl and Yeşil rivers. These rivers break through the mountain barrier in a zone of weakness where summits are below 2,000 feet, 600 meters, dividing the Pontic Mountains into western and eastern sections. In the western section, between the Sakarya and Kızıl rivers, there are four main ridges: the Kure, Bolu, Ilgaz, and Karaglu Mountains. East of the Yeşil, the system is higher, narrower, and steeper. Less than 50 miles from the coast, peaks rise to more than 10,000 feet, 3,000 meters, with a maximum elevation of 12,917 feet, 3,937 meters, in the Kaçkar Range. Separated by the narrow trough of the Kelkit and Choruk River valleys, stands a second ridge that rises above 8,000 feet, 2,400 meters. The Southern Folded Zone occupies the southern third of the country, from the Aegean to the Gulf of Iskenderun, from which it extends to the northeast and east around the northern side of the Arabian Platform. Over most of its length, the Mediterranean coastal plain is narrow, but there are two major lowland embayments. The Antalya Plain extends inland some 20 miles, 30 kilometers, from the Gulf of Antalya. The Adana Plain, measuring roughly 90 by 60 miles, 145 by 100 kilometers, comprises the Adana Plain, measuring roughly 90 by 60 miles, 145 by 100 kilometers, comprises the combined deltas of the Seyhan and Seyhan rivers. The mountain system falls into two main parts. West of Antalya, a complex series of ridges with a north-south trend reaches 6,500 to 8,200 feet, 2,000 to 2,500 meters, but the most prominent feature is the massive Taurus mountain system, running parallel to the Mediterranean coast and extending along the southern border. Their crest lines are often above 8,000 feet, 2,400 meters, and several peaks exceed 11,000 feet, 3,400 meters. In the eastern third of the country, the northern and southern fold systems converge to produce an extensive area of predominantly mountainous terrain, with pockets of relatively level land confined to valleys and enclosed basins, as are found around Malatya, Elazig, and Muş. The Central Massif is located in the western half of the country, between the Pontic and Taurus systems. This elevated zone is often referred to as the Anatolian Plateau, although its relief is much more varied than this term suggests. At least 4 subdivisions of the Central Massif can be identified. Inland from the Aegean, as far as a line from Bursa to Denizli, a series of faulted blocks gives a north-south alternation of steep-sided plateaus, rising 5,000 to 6,500 feet, 1,500 to 2,000 meters, and low-lying valley floors. Alluvial plains along the larger rivers, such as the Gediz, Küçük Menderes, and Büyük Menderes, are among the largest in Turkey and are of special agricultural value. East of this section, roughly to a line from Eskişehir to Burdur, is a complex upland zone. The general surface level rises to the east from 1,500 to 3,000 feet, 460 to 900 meters. Set into the upland are several down-faulted basins, and above it, short mountain ranges rise to 6,500 feet. The most distinctive part of the Central Massif is the area bounded on the south by the Taurus Mountains and on the northeast by a line from Ankara through Lake Tuz to Niğde. There, the term plateau is most applicable, with large expanses of flat or gently sloping land at elevations of about 3,000 feet, separated by low upswellings in the surface, measuring some 150 by 200 miles, 240 by 320 kilometers. These are by far the most extensive plains in Turkey. However, their agricultural value is reduced by the effects of altitude and location on their climate. The remainder of the Central Massif, a roughly triangular area with its eastern apex near Sivas, forms a mountainous zone that bounds the plains on their eastern side. Much of this section rises above 5,000 feet, 1,500 meters, and there are numerous peaks with elevations of about 6,500 feet. A noteworthy feature is the extensive area of geologically recent volcanic activity in Niğde, Nevşehir, and Kayseri provinces, including the volcanic peaks of Erciyes, 12,848 feet, 3,916 meters, and Hasan, 10,686 feet, 3,257 meters. Southeastern Turkey, between Gaziantep and the Tigris-Dikla River, rests on a stable massif called the Arabian Platform. It is characterized by relatively gentle relief, with broad plateau surfaces descending to the south from about 2,500 feet, 760 meters at the mountain foot, to 1,000 feet, 300 meters along the Syrian border. In the center of this zone, the volcanic Mount Karaca reaches 6,294 feet, 1,918 meters. The geologic structure of Turkey, where recent faulting and folding are widespread and mountain building is still in progress, is particularly conducive to earthquakes, of which there have been many of varying intensity in modern times. A number of serious events have been centered in the east, near Erzurum in 1959 and 1966, Bingöl in 1971 and 2003, and Erzincan in 1939 and 1992. In 1999, the country's northwest was struck by a powerful earthquake near Izmit, Kocaeli, that killed more than 17,000 people and evoked strong criticism of state institutions for their delayed response to the disaster. 8 main drainage basins may be discerned, of which 2 cross the country's frontiers and 6 are entirely within Turkish territory. The smallest, in the far east of the country, is that of the Aras River, which rises south of Erzurum and flows east for some 250 miles, 400 kilometers, to the frontier with Azerbaijan, eventually reaching the Caspian Sea. The bulk of eastern Turkey, however, is drained by the Euphrates, Fırat, and Tigris rivers, which flow south for some 780 miles, 1,250 kilometers, and 330, 530 kilometers miles, respectively, before entering Syria and then Iraq, where they converge to enter the Persian Gulf. See Tigris-Euphrates river system. There are 2 basins of inland drainage. In the far east, a small area drains to Lake Van, from which there is no surface outlet. The main inland basin is in west-central Anatolia. Its two main centers are the Lake Tuz and Konya basins. Several smaller, separate catchments in this basin contain lakes such as Egridir and Beyşehir. The remainder of the country drains to the four surrounding seas, Black, Marmara, Aegean, and Mediterranean, and can thus, in a sense, be considered a single system that eventually drains to the Mediterranean. Most of the rivers flowing to the Black Sea are short, torrential streams incised into the Pontic Mountains, but several have developed lengthy inland sections and tributaries running parallel to the east-west ranges of northern Turkey. These rivers include the Yenik, Filios, Çoreth, Kelkit, Yeşil, and Kızıl. One of the largest basins is that of the Sakarya River, which covers about 500 miles from its source, southwest of Ankara, to its mouth, north of Adapazarı. Numerous small rivers drain into the Sea of Marmara. The largest is the Mustafa Kemal Pasha. Most of European Turkey lies in the Ergeni-Maritsa Basin, which drains into the northern Aegean. The main elements of the Aegean drainage are the parallel rivers flowing west from the Anatolian interior, the Gediz, Küçük Menderes, and Büyük Menderes. Along the section of the Mediterranean coast, bounded by the Taurus Mountains, numerous rivers descend rapidly to the sea, including the short Aksu, Köprü, and Manavgat, and the longer Göksu. Two much larger rivers, the Seyhan and the Seyhan, flow into the Gulf of Iskenderun. Their broad combined delta forms the greater part of the fertile Adana Plain. Turkey has about 50 lakes with areas larger than 4 square miles and more than 200 smaller ones. By far the largest are Lakes Van, 1,434 square miles, 3,714 square kilometers, and Tuz, about 600 square miles, 1,550 square kilometers. The latter is very shallow, expanding and contracting with the seasons. Being centers of inland drainage, both are saline. The largest freshwater lakes are those in the Lake District on the north side of the Taurus system, which include Lakes Akşehir, Egridir, and Beyşehir. Another freshwater lake is Lake İznik, northeast of Bursa. The development of hydroelectric power has produced a number of artificial lakes, of which the largest are those connected with the Ataturk and Keben barrages on the Euphrates, the Hirfanli on the Kızıl, the Sarıyer on the Sakarya, the Demir Köprü on the Gediz, and the Seyhan on the Seyhan. Features and climatic variations produce major contrasts in soil types between the interior and the periphery. The detailed pattern, however, is complex. Zonal soil types are broken by variations in relief and parent material, and thus a variety of azonal soils are present. 7 main soil groups may be distinguished, each containing several soil types. Red and gray-brown podzolic soils, along with brown forest soils, represent the most extensive group, covering about 1/3 of the country. These occur mainly in mountainous areas as a broad belt around the northern, western, and southern sides of the Anatolian interior, and are associated with the more humid climatic zones. The red and gray-brown podzolic soils are moderately leached and somewhat acidic, the red type occurring in the wetter, warmer areas. Brown forest soils are generally developed on calcareous rocks and are less acidic than the red and gray-brown podzolic soils. Brown and reddish-brown soils are characteristic of the driest parts of the country, mainly in the semi-arid zones of central Anatolia and in the southeast. Covering about 1/5 of the country, they support extensive dryland brain production. These soils are for the most part calcareous and are more productive when irrigated. Non-calcic brown soils with rendinas and grumisols are found in slightly wetter climates. Non-calcic brown soils are a zonal type, less strongly leached and less acidic than the podzols. They are most extensive in lowland Thrace, but also occur in patches along the Aegean. Rendinas, highly calcareous zonal soils derived from limestones, occur mainly along the Mediterranean. Grumisols, found mainly in Thrace, also are calcareous, but are deeper and heavier. Chestnut soils are found on a smaller scale in the same regions as the brown and reddish-brown group, but under slightly more humid conditions where the parent materials are calcareous. Sarazems, highly alkaline semi-desert gray soils, are found in the driest areas, notably in the Konya Basin and the Aras Valley. Terra Rossas and red prairie soils are the products of limestone weathering under Mediterranean climates. The red prairie soils occur under warmer and damper conditions and are slightly more leached than the Terra Rossas. Both occur in patches along the Aegean and Mediterranean, notably in the Antalya and Adana lowlands. Alluvial soils, which cover only a small portion of the country, are the most valuable type and support the most intensive agriculture. These soils are found mainly in the valleys of the Marmara and Aegean regions, the deltas along the Black Sea, the basins of central and eastern Anatolia, and the Adana lowland. Turkey's varied climate, generally a dry semi-continental Mediterranean variant, is heavily influenced by the presence of the sea to the north, south, and west and by the mountains that cover much of the country. The sea and the mountains produce contrasts between the interior and the coastal fringes. Several areas have the winter rainfall maximum, typical of the Mediterranean regime, and summer drought is widespread. However, the elevation of the country ensures that winters are often much colder than is common in Mediterranean climates, and there are significant contrasts between winter and summer temperatures. January mean temperatures are below freezing throughout the interior, and in the east, there is a sizable area below 23 degrees Fahrenheit, -5 degrees Celsius. Extremely low temperatures occur at times, with minima from -4 degrees Fahrenheit, -20, in the west to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, -40 Celsius. The duration of snow cover ranges from 2 weeks in the warmer areas to 4 months in some mountainous areas in the east. The coastal fringes are mild, with January means above 41 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 degrees Celsius. Summers generally are hot. July means exceed 68 degrees Fahrenheit, 20 degrees Celsius, in all but the highest mountain areas, 77 degrees Fahrenheit, 25 degrees Celsius, along the Aegean and Mediterranean, and 86 degrees Fahrenheit, 30 degrees Celsius in the southeast. Precipitation is strongly affected by relief. Annual totals of 12 to 16 inches, 305 to 406 millimeters, are characteristic of much of the interior, whereas the higher parts of the Pontic and Taurus ranges receive more than 40 inches, 1,000 millimeters. Contrasts between the interior and the coasts produce 6 main climatic regions. The Black Sea coastlands are the wettest region, with rain throughout the year and a winter maximum. Annual totals exceed 32 inches, 813 millimeters, reaching 96 inches, 2,438 millimeters in the east. Frosts can occur, but winters are generally mild, with January means of 43 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit, 6 to 7 degrees Celsius. Summers are hot, with July means above 68 degrees Fahrenheit, 20 degrees Celsius, at sea level. Thrace and Marmara are influenced by winter depressions passing through the straits, but summers are drier than along the Black Sea. Annual precipitation ranges from 24 to 36 inches, 610 to 914 millimeters, with a pronounced winter maximum. January mean temperatures are close to freezing. Summers are hot, with July means above 77 degrees Fahrenheit, 25 degrees Celsius. The Aegean coastlands have a Mediterranean regime. Average temperatures range from 45 to 47 degrees Fahrenheit, 7 to 8 degrees Celsius in January, to 77 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit, 25 to 30 degrees Celsius in July. And frosts are rare. Annual rainfall from 24 to 32 inches, 610 to 813 millimeters, and there's a pronounced summer drought. The Mediterranean coastlands display characteristics similar to the Aegean, but in a more intense form. July means exceed 83 degrees Fahrenheit, 28 degrees Celsius at sea level. Annual rainfall declines from 40 inches, 1,000 millimeters in the west, to barely 24 inches in the Adana Plain. And the summer months are virtually rainless at sea level. Patterns of natural vegetation are closely related to those of relief, climate, and soils. There are two main types: steppe grasslands, which occur mainly in central Anatolia and the southeast, but are also found in lowland Thrace and in the valleys and basins of eastern Anatolia, and forest and woodland, which cover the remainder of the country. Over much of Turkey, however, these natural vegetation types have been greatly modified by human action, both directly through lumbering and clearance for agriculture and indirectly through the activities of grazing animals. The richest type of woodland is the Pontic or Colchian forest, confined to the eastern part of the Black Sea coastlands, where rainfall is heavy, there is no summer drought, and winters are mild. Hornbeam, sweet chestnut, oriental spruce, and alder are the commonest species, and there is a rich shrub layer of rhododendron, laurel, holly, myrtle, hazel, and walnut. The remainder of the Black Sea zone is occupied by humid deciduous forest, second only to the Colchian type in richness and variety. The main tree species in the Black Sea zone are oriental spruce, beech, hornbeam, alder, oak, fir, and yew, with oak and pine in the drier parts. Coniferous species become dominant above 3,300 feet, 1,000 meters, giving way to alpine grassland above 6,500 feet, 2,000 meters. Drier conditions in the western and eastern parts of the interior, on either side of the central steppe grassland zone, produce the drier mixed and deciduous forest belt, where the dominant species are oak, juniper, pine, and fir, with patches of open grassland. Mediterranean mountain forest is characteristic of the central and western Taurus range. Pine, fir, and oak are the main species, but cedar, beech, juniper, and maple also occur. Along the Aegean and Mediterranean coasts is a belt of Mediterranean lowland vegetation of the Maki type. Myrtle, wild olive, laurel, and carob are the commonest species, but there are occasional stands of oak, pine, and cypress. Turkey is fairly rich in wild animals and game birds. Wolves, foxes, boars, wildcats, beavers, martens, jackals, hyenas, bears, deer, gazelles, and mountain goats are still found in secluded and wooded regions. Domesticated animals include water buffalo, Angora goats on the Central Massif, and camels in the southwest, as well as horses, donkeys, sheep, and cattle. Major game birds are partridge, wild geese, quail, and bustards. According to the Turkish constitution, the word Turk as a political term includes all citizens of the Republic of Turkey, without distinction of or reference to race or religion. Ethnic minorities have no official status. Linguistic data show that a majority of the population claim Turkish as their mother tongue. Most of the remainder speak Kurdish and a small minority Arabic. There are a further 6 ethnic groups with sizable numbers. Greeks, Armenians, and Jews are found almost entirely in Istanbul, and Circassians, Georgians, and Laz are generally located in the Far East. More than 9/10 of the population is Muslim. Nevertheless, Turkey is a secular country. In a 1928 constitutional amendment, Islam was removed as the official state religion, and since that time, the state has found itself periodically at odds with religion. The armed forces have maintained a vigilant watch over Turkey's political secularism, which they affirm to be a keystone among Turkey's founding principles. The military has not left the maintenance of a secular political process to chance, however, and has intervened in politics on a number of occasions. Meanwhile, Turkey's strong secularism has resulted in what have been perceived by some as strictures on the freedom of religion. For example, the headscarf has long been prohibited in a number of public venues. Such restrictions on religious freedom have been confronted in the 21st century by the rise of the Justice and Development Party, Adalet ve Kalkınma Partisi, AKP. A constitutional amendment was passed in February 2008 that permitted women to wear headscarves on university campuses. In addition to the Muslim majority, there also exist small populations of Jews and Christians. Christian adherents are divided between Greek Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Protestant, and other denominations. About 3/4 of the population lives in towns and cities. Prior to the mid-20th century, however, the population was predominantly rural, and its distribution was strongly influenced by the agricultural potential of the land. Thus, there are pronounced regional variations in population density, the main contrast being between the interior and the periphery. The regional coastlands of the Black Sea, the Sea of Marmara, and the Aegean Sea are the most densely settled regions. Accounting for less than 2/5 of the country's land area, the regions together represent more than half its population. The Mediterranean coastal region is more thinly settled, though there are pockets of high population density in the Antalya and Adana basins. The remainder of the country is relatively lightly populated. The Anatolian interior and southeast, occupying more than half the country's territory, contain less than 2/5 of Turkey's population. At the beginning of the 21st century, however, the southeast was the country's fastest-growing region. Historically, much of Anatolia, especially the east, was populated by nomads and transhumans who migrated seasonally between upland and plain. Some of their descendants, herders of sheep and goats, moved from plain to mountain, living in tents, while others possess houses in 2 or even 3 villages at different altitudes. Over much of the country, the bulk of the population lives in villages, which are estimated to number at least 50,000. The average village population tends to vary, and many villages comprise 2 or 3 separate rural settlements some distance apart. The typical Turkish village house is a rectangular flat-roofed building, the color of the local unbaked brick or stone from which it is made, 1 or 2 stories high. The poorest contain a single room to house family, livestock, and possessions. The better village houses encompass joint households of perhaps 20 people living in large compounds, off which lead many living rooms, stores, stables, and barns. The vast majority of homes fall between these extremes, and there is great local variation. Commonly, the head of the household and his wife live and sleep in the main room of the house, which contains the bedding stacked away in the daytime. The cooking stove, in some areas a beehive-shaped oven built into the floor, shelves with cooking pots and implements, a gaily painted chest containing the woman's trousseau and personal possessions, and a chest for flour and grain. People sit on rugs or mats spread on the floor. Many homes also have at least one room fitted as a guest room, normally for the use of men only. The guest room has built-in divans running along the walls and very often a stone or wooden floor. The most marked contrast occurs in the forests of the northern mountain ranges, where the village homes are made of timber and have red roofs. Brick, cement, and cinder block are now also becoming common wherever people can afford them. Cities in Turkey are for the most part of moderate size, though many have grown rapidly since the 1970s. The largest is Istanbul. Though no longer the capital city, it remains the chief port and commercial center, attracting migrants from the entire country. With its suburbs along the Bosporus, Istanbul forms a sprawling agglomeration with nearly 15 million inhabitants. The second largest city, Ankara, is of much more recent origin. Prior to the establishment of the Republic, it was one of many small provincial towns in the interior, but its choice as the capital city has resulted in a long period of rapid growth. The third largest city, Izmir, is the port and commercial center for the prosperous Aegean coastal zone. Apart from these three main centers, an important cluster of cities is located in the Adana Plain, where Adana, Mersin, İçil, and a number of smaller centers are situated. Elsewhere, the chief cities are widely separated regional and provincial capitals, of which the largest are Bursa in the Marmara lowlands, Samsun on the Black Sea, Antalya on the Mediterranean, Konya, Kayseri, Eskişehir, Malatya, Erzurum, and Sivas in the interior, and Diyarbakır, Gaziantep, and Şanlıurfa in the southeast. Traditional Anatolian townhouses, still the most common residence in many smaller cities, were built in stone or wood, usually of 2 stories, with wooden floors and sometimes beautifully carved ceilings. The upper story often protrudes, cantilever fashion, into the street. With whitewashed walls and red-tiled roofs, these small towns sometimes present a more modern appearance than most villages. Though just as often, the distinction between large villages and small towns is barely visible. In the larger cities, while traditional building types are still visible in the older areas, large, recently developed sections are dominated by simpler styles in brick and concrete. Downtown areas have an increasingly European appearance. In 1927, the total population of the Turkish Republic was about 13 million. Since then, it has increased more than 6-fold. Growth was particularly rapid after World War II, reaching nearly 3% annually in the early 1960s. But the rate of growth has since declined. A fall in the birth rate was the main factor for the decline, offset somewhat by a decline in the death rate. A notable development of the post-war period was large-scale internal migration from rural to urban areas, both within each province and over longer distances. Areas attracting the most migrants were those with major urban agglomerations, the zone around the Sea of Marmara, the Aegean coast, the Adana Plain, and Ankara. Net migration losses occurred over much of the interior, particularly the eastern part. Another element of population movement was the movement of Turkish workers abroad. In the early 1980s, some 2 million Turks lived in various Western European countries, 3/4 of them in what was then West Germany. And there were numerous short-term Turkish workers in Arab countries, mainly Libya and Saudi Arabia. The demand for Turkish labor abroad subsequently declined, and the outflow became much smaller. In the early 21st century, there were roughly 6 million Turkish citizens living abroad, of which a majority were living in Western Europe. Since its inception in 1923, Turkey has operated a mixed economy in which both state and private enterprise contribute to economic development. The economy has been transformed from predominantly agricultural to one in which industry and services are the most productive and rapidly expanding sectors. A decade into the 21st century, the services sector engaged about 1/2 of the workforce, while agriculture and industry each occupied about 1/4. Until about 1950, the state played the leading role in industrialization, providing most of the capital for structural improvement in railways, ports, and shipping facilities, and for the establishment of such basic industries as mining, metallurgy, and chemicals. It also invested in manufacturing, notably in the food processing, textile, and building material sectors. Emerging industries were protected by tariff barriers, and foreign investment was discouraged. The economy remained self-contained and somewhat isolated, with foreign trade playing only a minor role. Major political developments of the early post-war period, such as the institution of a multi-party democracy and Turkey's adherence to the Western Alliance, had a profound effect on the economy, which became more open to foreign influences. Foreign aid, chiefly from the United States, arrived in large quantities and was used in part to finance agricultural expansion and to import agricultural and industrial machinery and transportation equipment. Growth accelerated, with the private sector playing an increasing role. State intervention, mainly in the form of government loans to private firms, remained strong, and economic development was guided by a series of 5-year plans. By the late 1970s, however, the economy was plagued by high inflation, large-scale unemployment, and a chronic foreign trade deficit. Consequently, during the 1980s, there were further shifts in economic policy, including the encouragement of foreign investment, the establishment of joint enterprises, a reduction in the relative importance of the state sector, and a vigorous export drive. By the 1990s, inflation remained a serious problem, and Turkey's per capita gross domestic product remained well below those of most Middle Eastern and European countries. Facing inflation that had reached almost 100% by 1997, an 18-month economic monitoring program was initiated with the International Monetary Fund, which succeeded in significantly decreasing the rate of inflation in the following 2 years. A financial crisis in 2000 to 2001 forced Turkey to accept another round of IMF-supported reforms. Economic growth was strong in the first decade of the 21st century until 2009, when the global economic crisis pushed the country into a brief recession that was followed by a recovery. Turkey has a great variety of natural resources, though few occur on a large scale. Apart from Iran, Turkey is the only Middle Eastern country with significant coal deposits, mainly in the Zonguldak field. Output of lignite is substantial. There is small-scale production of oil from fields in the southeast of the country, as well as in the northwestern Thrace region. This provides for only a fraction of the country's needs, and Turkey is thus dependent on imported petroleum products. Both lignite and oil are used in electricity generation, and hydroelectric resources are under intensive development. Among the largest hydroelectric plants are those on the Sakarya, Kemer, Kızıl, and Seyhan rivers, and on the Keben and Ataturk barrages on the Euphrates. A national electricity grid covers the whole country, including nearly all villages. The most important metallic ores are iron, mainly from Divriği in Sivas province, and chromite, much of which is exported. There are significant deposits of manganese, zinc, lead, copper, and bauxite. About 1/3 of Turkey's land area is utilized for agriculture, much of it extensively. About half of the agricultural land is used for field crops, and about 1/3 for grazing. These proportions have remained fairly stable since the 1960s, following a period of rapid change in the 1950s, when the advent of tractors supported significant expansion of arable land, mainly at the expense of grazing land. A smaller proportion of the cultivated land consists of vineyards, orchards, olive groves, and vegetables gardens. The most important field crops are cereals. These occupy 1/2 of the cultivated area. A majority of the cereal land is sown in wheat, with smaller areas of barley, rye, oats, corn, maize, and rice. Other important crops are cotton, sugar beets, tobacco, and potatoes. Roughly 1/6 of the cropland is irrigated. Livestock farming is a major activity. Turkey has vast numbers of cattle, sheep, goats, and water buffalo. Landholdings are generally small, with family farms averaging only 15 acres, 6 hectares. Agricultural products provide substantial export earnings. Cotton, tobacco, fruits, vegetables, nuts, livestock, and livestock products are the main items. Regional variations in agriculture reflect those in the physical environment, especially between the interior, where cereals and livestock are predominant, and the coastal fringes, where most of the higher-value crops are grown. The relative warmth and dampness of the Black Sea coastlands make this region one of the most intensively cultivated despite its limited lowlands. Corn is the chief cereal and supports large numbers of cattle. High-value crops include hazelnuts, tobacco, tea, walnuts, almonds, pistachios, and citrus and other fruits. Sugar beets, sunflowers, potatoes, and vegetables also are important. The Aegean coastlands constitute the most productive, commercialized, and export-oriented region, with a relatively low proportion of cereals. Cotton is the main industrial crop, and the Aegean coastlands are Turkey's chief area of olive production. There are extensive vineyards, and the region is famous for its raisins, sultanas, and figs. The western part of the Mediterranean coastlands is dominated by wheat and barley, but cotton, flax, sesame, potatoes, fruits, including grapes and citrus, and even bananas around Alanya, and rice also are grown. The Adana Plain is an important cotton-producing region. The elevated lands of the Anatolian interior are dominated by livestock and cereals.